ABC is reporting that special counsel Jack Smith has gotten Donald Trump's communications guru Dan Scavino to testify that he was in the White House on January 6, and that he and several other staffers begged Donald Trump to do something to stop the insurrection, but Trump just sat there with his arms folded, watching his television, refusing to say or do anything until moments later when Trump took to Twitter and blamed Mike Pence for not doing the right thing. Scavino, according to ABC News, is prepared to testify that after being told the Capitol was under siege, Trump's response was basically, let it burn, unquote. ABC also reports that another Trump aide, Nick Luna, is prepared to testify that when he told Trump that Mike Pence had to be moved to a secure location in the middle of the insurrection, Trump responded, so what? More and more reports coming out of the special counsel's office suggest that between Trump's White House chief of staff, Mark Meadows, turning state's evidence, and testimony from several other unindicted co-conspirators, it will be next to impossible for a jury not to convict Donald Trump in Washington, D.C., which might explain why Jack Smith was the victim of a swatting on Sunday night. Police were called to his house after someone called in a phony, anonymous report of a gunman holding people hostage inside Smith's home. This is what's going on. Trump supporters are swatting anybody who goes after Donald Trump. It also explains why over the weekend the presiding judge in that trial, Tanya Chutkan, was also the victim of a swatting. 1/3 of the special counsel's budget is spent on security for Jack Smith, his staff, and witnesses. 1/3 of his budget. More is being spent on round-the-clock protection for Judge Chutkan, as well as potential witnesses, and eventually they'll have to provide security for jurors and the court staff. We know what's going on in Fulton County. We know that Fani Willis and her entire staff has round-the-clock security. This is exactly what fascism looks like. Election workers, members of Congress, prosecutors, judges, jurors, and witnesses are inundated by death threats. And all this fascist pig Donald Trump can say is, you know, if I'm indicted, if I lose the election, if the Supreme Court rules against me, I can't control how my supporters respond. Instead of saying to his supporters, knock it off, he says, Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. Stand by. On the campaign trail, he is now calling the hundreds of January 6ers behind bars hostages. He says he loves them. He says he loves the people who stormed the Capitol. He refers to them now as great patriots. In Iowa over the weekend, Donald Trump said, quote, I call them hostages. Some people call them prisoners. I call them hostages. Release the J6 hostages, Joe. Joe Biden. Release them, Joe. You can do it. Real easy, Joe. And it's not just crackpots like Paul Gosar of Arizona or Marjorie Taylor Greene calling them hostages. Elise Stefanik, the Harvard-educated wife of a gun lobbyist, part of the Republican leadership in the House, referred to the people arrested for their role on January 6 as hostages too. On Meet the Press Sunday, she referred to them as hostages. Steve Scalise, the majority leader, can't bring himself to say Joe Biden was legitimately elected. On Face the Nation Sunday, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, self-righteously took umbrage, was insulted when asked if he was still an election denier. An election denier? Of course I'm not, he said, but then refused to admit that Joe Biden won in 2020. Trump owns the House Republican caucus. So far, according to the New York Times, he has secured endorsements from 100 Republican members of the House. Nikki Haley has 0. Ron DeSantis, who served in the House, only has 5 members endorsing him. One of them is Chip Roy, who with Ken Buck was the only member of the Freedom Caucus to certify the election for Joe Biden. So to Chip Roy's credit, he certified the election for Joe Biden in 2020, and he's endorsed Ron DeSantis, who is even worse than Donald Trump. Well, Alan Dershowitz pretty much said during the first Trump impeachment that if the president does something to get reelected, it's not illegal. Trump is now insisting he has something called presidential immunity. He and his lawyers are now claiming that the president of the United States cannot be charged after he leaves office for any crimes he may or may not have committed while he was president. Now, we know this is simply not true. When Trump's lawyers in the election interference case filed a motion to dismiss the charges based on presidential immunity, Judge Tanya Chutkan, who was just swatted, threw out the motion because it's ridiculous. Former presidents can be charged with crimes after they leave office for crimes they committed while they were in office. In fact, there are no laws preventing a sitting president from being charged with a crime while he is in office for a crime he committed while in office. The only reason Robert Mueller didn't recommend an indictment in the Mueller report was it's only the official policy of our Justice Department not to indict a sitting president. It's a norm. It's not a law. It's a norm. In 1973, the Office of Legal Counsel inside the Justice Department prepared a memorandum that has become official policy for the Justice Department, and that policy is a sitting president cannot be indicted for crimes he committed while he was president. Everyone else in the executive branch, according to this memorandum, may be indicted, including the vice president, and that happened to Spiro Agnew in 73 when that memorandum was written. Nixon's vice president had to resign, and he famously pleaded nolo contendere to a bribery case. Nolo contendere means no contest. It's a fancy way for saying guilty. The Office of Legal Counsel, in their memo, in their 1973 memo, says that if Congress impeaches the president, removes him from office, if the Senate votes to remove him from office, then the Department of Justice can immediately indict him as an ex-president. So in that memorandum, the Office of Legal Counsel said, you can't indict a sitting president. It's not against the law. It's just our policy. But you can indict an ex-president. If you remember, Trump's lawyers, wanting to delay this March trial, appealed Judge Chutkan's ruling. Judge Chutkan, the one who was swatted over the weekend, she threw out the presidential immunity motion, and his lawyers are appealing, hoping to slow the process down until after the November election, when presumably Donald Trump could do what Nixon did with Archibald Cox and fire Jack Smith. Smith filed a motion with the Supreme Court in December to expedite their ruling, asking for permission to leapfrog over the appeals courts to get a ruling so the trial could remain on schedule. The Supreme Court said no, the question of presidential immunity must go through the regular appeals process. Really? The Supreme Court doesn't know about presidential immunity? They want to hear the arguments in the lower courts? Well, on Tuesday, today, the Circuit Court in Washington, D.C. begins hearing Trump's ridiculous argument for presidential immunity. His ridiculous argument that the president of the United States can do whatever he wants and never be charged with a crime. Now, if the Supreme Court, and you never know, rules that there is such a thing as presidential immunity, this would be tantamount to Germany's Enabling Act in 1933 that gave Hitler untrammeled power If there's such a thing as presidential immunity, it's over. And you got to remember, there are people like Bill Barr who believe in the unitary executive theory, which means they believe the president holds unlimited power over the entire executive branch with no judicial checks. In other words, the Justice Department works for the president, and he's immune. He is pretty much king for 4 years or 8 years. Trump announced that he will be in D.C. attending the hearing today. That's less than a week before the Iowa caucuses. Trump is going to sit in a courtroom and listen to the argument. Why? The same reason Judge Tanya Chutkan and Jack Smith got swatted over the weekend. This is Trump eyeballing the judges to let them know he knows who they are and where they live. The only reason he's going to be there today is to intimidate. The two legal precedents to watch in all this are Nixon versus Fitzgerald and Clinton versus Jones. I'll start off with Clinton versus Jones. Paula Jones filed a sexual harassment suit against President Clinton, claiming that he sexually harassed her when he was the governor of Arkansas. He claims he exposed himself in a hotel room. She claims he exposed himself in a hotel room and asked her to pleasure him. She filed the lawsuit while Clinton was president of the United States. The lawsuit was funded by the vast right-wing conspiracy that wanted to remove Clinton from office by any means necessary. Well, the president went to the Supreme Court and said, I shouldn't have to sit for a civil lawsuit. I got more important things to do. But the Supreme Court issued a narrow ruling saying that a sitting president can't be tried in a civil court for damages he committed while he was president. The court ruled, however, that a sitting president can be tried in a civil court for damages he committed before he became president. Paula Jones accused him of harassing her while Clinton was governor before he was president. So the Supreme Court ruled that Clinton could be deposed while he was president. He could be deposed by Paula Jones's attorneys. Now, at the time, Ken Starr, remember him? He was the independent or the special prosecutor. I always get those confused, but he was the prosecutor looking, I think it was the independent prosecutor. I think that's what they call them. We don't have them anymore, but he was the independent prosecutor looking into, let me know in the comments, is it special prosecutor or independent prosecutor? I'm going to bet that it's independent prosecutor, but they don't have them anymore. Ken Starr at the time was the prosecutor. He was Archibald Cox looking into the Whitewater scandal, which was nothing. But, you know, he had nothing. He was spending tens of millions of dollars. He had nothing. He poured over Hillary Clinton's billing records at the Rose Law Firm in Arkansas. Found nothing. He had nothing. He was empty. However, Ken Starr knew Paula Jones's attorneys. They were all part of the same conspiracy. And when Linda Tripp, Monica Lewinsky's friend, told Ken Starr that Clinton was carrying on with Monica in the Oval Office, which was perfectly legal, Ken Starr decided to set up a sting operation. He told Paula Jones's lawyers, hey, you're going to depose Bill Clinton. Why don't you ask Clinton about Monica Lewinsky during the Paula Jones deposition? Well, he set up a sting. And Clinton was asked about having sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky, and he denied it. And he was busted. It was a sting operation. They had nothing on Bill Clinton, so Ken Starr forced him into committing a crime. It was a honeypot to get him to lie under oath about sex with Monica Lewinsky. And everything stopped in this country. For 2 years, Clinton was removed. No, Clinton was impeached, not removed from office. So that's Jones versus Clinton, or Clinton v. Jones. You'll be hearing a lot about that today. The other legal precedent is Nixon versus Fitzgerald. In 1982, what would that be? 8 years, 74, 4, 6, and 2. 8 years after Nixon resigned, the Supreme Court ruled that I'm going quickly here. The Supreme Court ruled that a president is entitled to absolute legal immunity when it comes to civil liabilities for actions committed during his term in office. Right? You cannot sue a president in civil court for anything he did. He has absolute immunity. You cannot take him to civil court for anything he did to you while he was president. But the Supreme Court in Nixon versus Fitzgerald not only ruled, but emphasized, if you read the ruling, that the president is not immune from criminal liability for authorized or unauthorized acts as president. Let me repeat this because I know I'm going quickly. How are we doing on time here? Okay. In Nixon v. Fitzgerald, the Supreme Court in 1982 ruled and emphasized the president is not immune from criminal liability for authorized or unauthorized acts as president. Now, eventually the Supreme Court is going to have to take this case. And I have no doubt that the circuit court in D.C., which there's a 3-judge panel that is hearing the case starting today, I have no doubt they're going to cite Nixon versus Fitzgerald, and they're going to let stand Judge Tanya Chutkan's ruling that there is no such thing as presidential immunity from criminal prosecution after a president leaves office. Now, when it goes to the Supreme Court, they're going to have to do one of two things. Either uphold the lower court's ruling in favor of Judge Chutkan, or they're going to have to overturn Nixon v. Fitzgerald the same way they overturned Roe v. Wade. And if they overturn Nixon v. Fitzgerald, that's all she wrote. That's all she wrote. It's the Enabling Act. Say goodbye to democracy. Trump's lawyers in the Georgia RICO trial filed a motion to have those indictments thrown out on Monday. They're also citing presidential immunity. Once again, the real intent there is to start an appeals process that delays the Georgia trial until after the presidential election. And then, after the presidential election, assuming Trump wins, the Supreme Court will have to decide if a sitting president can be tried for a crime he committed during his first term, blah, 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 blah. On Sunday, Trump warned that if he's not granted presidential immunity for what he did while president, he warned that when I get back into the Oval Office, I will criminally prosecute Joe Biden for the crimes he committed as president. And what are those crimes that Joe Biden committed? Allowing the migrants to come over the border? Really? You mean the same exact crime Donald Trump was guilty of when he was president?